Hi guys, welcome to the first AP Psychology video lecture, I suppose. So I'm gonna get through this. A couple things to note before we get started. In my book, the third edition, it's the one with the bike on it. It's blue for you guys. That is module 55 in the blue book is module 55 plus 56 in the green book in the second edition. So there's an extra sort of like module at play there. So just know that module 55 in my book covers both Freud and which is psychoanalysis and his later sort of followers and dissenters, which is the psychodynamic perspective. So just know that. So this is actually 55 and 56 if you have the green book. If you have the blue book, the third edition, then you're good. It's just 55 and we're all good to go. But let's get started. My face may take up some key text and stuff, so please follow along in your own books or just on your own if you can to the PowerPoint slide. I'm going to try to hopefully breeze through this as fast as I can. I have really bad allergies, and if I have to blow my nose or you hear me sniffling, that's why. I'm sorry. I waited until later in the day until it got better, and it didn't get better, so here we are. But let's do it. Let's talk about Freud. So, module 55, which covers quite a few things, and actually here we go already, starting off. Apologize in advance, guys. There's going to be a lot of that. So, Freud's psychoanalytic perspective exploring the unconscious. So, Freud he's kind of like the one psychologist that people know the most. He's the one that we all associate with. He is the Elvis Presley, right? As Elvis Presley is to rock music, so is Sigmund Freud to psychology. People just know him. Even though most of what he did was incorrect. And I know we always say, like, why are we learning about him? Because it's important. It's a stepping stone to getting to the correct place. And he is the father of one of the main schools or ways of thinking about psychology today, which is the psychodynamic perspective. So, let's take a look at him. Freud was the first to focus clinical attention on the unconscious mind. At this point, psychology was very much physical, and he found a lot of people who had ailments that couldn't be explained physically. So he was trying to figure out why a patient's hand might be numb when there is no single nerve in your body that will make your whole hand go numb. If it's severed or something like that, it's a collection of nerves. So we tried to figure that out. And he called his theory on personality and his associated treatment techniques, this is psychoanalysis. So remember, psychoanalysis, that's Freud. Analysis is Freud. Psychodynamic can be other people like Carl Jung or Alfred Adler, but analysis, that's Sigmund Freud. His theory was essentially that the mind is mostly underneath the surface or hidden. Beneath our awareness is the larger unconscious or subconscious mind. And we have lots of thoughts basically that we temporarily store in a preconscious area, and we repress or forcibly block from our consciousness. That means like some things we don't actually allow to come to our conscious mind, we push them down and repress them, but we'll talk more about that when we get to defense mechanisms. Nothing was ever accidental is also what he said too, i.e. is called the Freudian slip. It's like when you say something, you misspeak, but it's because you were actually thinking that, and there's some examples. Dreams are the royal road to the unconscious is what he believed. The remembered content of dreams, the manifest content, which we actually learned about this when we learned about dreams already, he believed was the censored expression of the dreamer's unconscious wishes, the dream's latent content. So essentially, the dreams gave your unconscious mind a chance to fully flex itself and explore avenues that it could not throughout the day because it was being held in check by the conscious mind. And we'll talk more about that in a second here. So this iceberg is really the big thing that people always like to use for Freud. So the conscious mind, this is that bit that is poking out above the surface that you can see. The preconscious, or the subconscious, things we could be aware of if we wanted or tried. This is just below the level. So these are things that we like have the ability to access, but choose not to. And then the unconscious is things we are unaware of and cannot become aware of, or at least without help. And then what happens is Freud had this three-part idea about how our brains work. Above the water level is something called the ego and the superego, and below is something called the id. So let's take a closer look at that system, how it works. So here you can see there's Freud in The Simpsons, and he oftentimes would use this sort of analysis with his patients where he'd make them lie down and he'd have them talk about stuff. We'll talk about free association here in a little bit. A Freudian slip is when you say one thing, but you mean your mother. I mean another. See? Like, it's like, because Freud is all about, like, your mom, and if you remember the Oedipal complex, it's all about your mom. You can see how you say one thing, but you mean another. You're actually talking about, like you say the incorrect thing in a sentence, but it's actually the thing you were actually thinking of. So, like, this comic's a good example. I wish I had more hair. Don't be silly, Billy. Don't be a silly Billy. You've got plenty of hair. Here's your bald, I mean your boiled egg. Yeah, there you go. See? Big is beautiful conference. Wow. Heavy turnout. That one's my favorite. But anyway, yeah, Freudian slip. In Freud's view, human personality, including emotions or strivings, arises from conflict between impulse and restraint. That's like what you want to do and what you can tell yourself you can't do. Between our aggressive, pleasure-seeking biological urges and our internalized social controls. So basically, we've got this animal brain that just wants to do stuff, mostly eat and have sex and maybe commit violence. And then you have like a more civilized brain that keeps you from doing that at all times. So that's this three-part system. The first one is the id. This is constantly striving to seek basic drives, and it operates on something called the pleasure principle, which means basically that it wants to be fulfilled as soon as it can, always, sort of instant gratification. Then you have the ego. This is operating on the reality principle. So this is trying to take what your brain does, or what your brain wants to do, what your id wants to do, and how the real world will react to it. And it tries to sort of resolve those together to give you the most amount of pleasure you can while still, like, not tanking your future, essentially. Like, if I just want to operate on the pleasure principle and I love donuts, well, then I'll eat, like, a dozen Krispy Kreme donuts every day. But in the long run, that's going to make me fat and unhealthy. So the ego would say, all right, have one Krispy Kreme a day. So that way you can still fulfill your pleasure principle a little bit while still using the reality principle to keep your long-term options sort of open and viable. And then 3 is the superego, the voice of our moral compass, our conscience that forces the ego to consider the ideal. So always think about, like, the cartoon. Like, I always think about The Emperor's New Groove, where Kronk has that one scene where he's got the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other. That's kind of the situation that you have here. In your head, yourself is the ego. You are making the decision. The ego is the executive, the decision maker, but it has to listen to the angel on one side, which is the superego, the morality, and then the id on the other, which would be the devil, which is just telling you what you want to hear. You know, the sinful path. Doesn't always have to be sinful, but I think it fits better thematically with that anyway. Blow my nose again. Sorry, guys. I think next time I'll just shove tissue paper up there and it'll look real funny. So here you go. Great example. Ego, the id, I need to eat right this second. Super ego, you can't do that because you're in the middle of an important meeting. So maybe, like, the ego will make the decision, okay, next time bring a snack. So you can just kind of snack during the important meeting. Fulfilling the id, but also keeping the superego. And again, there you go. Homer Simpson. Ego, superego, id. Oh boy, now this is where it gets fun. Okay, so I will post a video, I'll attach a video to this video as well, or I'll put this video up and a couple others as well. But this is how Freud believed we developed, that essentially we have this pleasure-seeking id energy inside of us, and as we get older, it moves around our body and manifests itself in different ways. And these are what he called the psychosexual stages of development. So what happens is, if you do not receive the proper attention and you don't receive the pleasure at a certain stage, you could have fixation during that stage, and you could have, like, a problem. So essentially, the first stage we know is oral, because that is when you're 0 to 18 months, all your pleasure comes from the mouth, which is like sucking. You know, that's how you eat, biting and chewing. Babies love to chew on stuff as they start to teeth, you know. So that's oral. And then from 1.5 years to 3 years old, that's when you start learning potty training. So that's called anal, right? That's the anal stage, where all your pleasure comes from that. It's this feeling of getting control of your life, and that gives you pleasure. Now, if you are anal retentive, perhaps you really focused in on this stage, you may be a very clean and orderly person in your life. But if you're anal expulsive, meaning you did not receive the attention, you're going to be a messy person for the rest of your life. And again, this is Freud's theory, not necessarily true, but it's what he believed. And then you have the phallic stage from 3 to 6. Pleasure zone is in the genitals, coping with incestuous sexual feelings. This is where we get the Oedipal complex. You can see it's right down here, the Oedipus complex. A boy's sexual desires towards his mother and feelings of jealousy and hatred for the rival father. Basically saying that like every young boy wants to sleep with his mom and kill his dad. And then the Electra complex is the same one, but for women, where they feel like the penis is the superior sex organ and they want to basically kill their mother and spend more time with their father. And they develop something called penis envy, which in the video it's all explained. It's all ridiculous, but it's interesting. And eventually, and then after that, you have the latent stage where everything kind of goes dormant, where kids just kind of start, like identifying with their own genders a little bit more, their own sexes. And then finally, once you hit puberty on, you hit the genital phase, and that's where you have mature sexual interests, and your id energy is more focused on like things like having sex. So kind of progress to that area. Moving on. And the attached video goes into more detail. One of the other Freudian colloquialisms you may be familiar with is called a defense mechanism. It's something that we do to protect ourselves from anxiety, essentially. I'm just going to put this whole list up here. These are all the different kinds. You have regression, reaction, formation, projection, rationalization, displacement, sublimation, denial. You need to know these. If we were in class, I would have a worksheet for you guys to practice these. We can't do that right now. I do probably have a worksheet, but I don't have a scanner, so I don't have a way to get it to you guys. But this is something worth practicing and going over. Please pay attention to the defense mechanisms because there's 7 of them. And this is something you can email me individually about if you have a question about it, or we can talk about during our Zoom meeting. These are ways that we try to get rid of anxiety-producing thoughts or feelings in ourself, basically. The most serious problem with Freud's theory, it offers after-the-fact explanations of any characteristic, yet it fails to predict such behaviors and traits. So it's like, what good is a theory if it doesn't predict what's going to happen? If you can just explain something after the fact, it's like, well, cool, that doesn't help me at all. I can't be proactive about solving this problem. I just have it, now I understand it. So that's one big problem with this theory. Even with his core belief in repressed memories, high stress and associated stress hormones actually enhance memory. So that's another criticism as well, is he said that we repress all these feelings, that we repress and get rid of all this anxiety. But in reality, when you have high anxiety, stress, that's the things that you remember the best or with the most detail. I think about the car crash that I had. I don't try to suppress what happened there. I remember what happened in my car crash in vivid detail. And if any of you guys have had a stressful event like that, you probably do too. Ultimately, he's still a huge part of psychological history. He's largely discredited, though, so that's unfortunate. Read that comment while I blow my nose. Get it? It's because, like, she's, like, upset that it's all wrong, but then she just goes right back to using, like, Freud theories. I don't think it might not even be on here, but I would say maybe he might have put something on free association here. Yes. So he would use this, he would also use this technique called free association, where he would basically just have patients talk about whatever they wanted to talk about. And then he was hoping that, like, just with this free association, by just letting the mind wander, it would drift towards, the root of the problem. So that's another technique that Freud would use as well, and that's what the famous, like, sort of sitting on the couch and talking to a psychologist, what this lady's doing right here is based off that free association. Tell me about your mother, and then you would just start talking, and then you would lead the psychologist to the problem itself. All right, and then we have basically these are people who, just a second, I want to see how much time I have left in my recording. Oh gosh, I have like no time left at all. Jeez. We should be able to get through this. I'm gonna run through this because I can only record for 15 minutes. Psychodynamic theories are people who came after Freud. They followed in his footsteps, but they changed his theories specifically. So, for example, I'm just going to the big hits. Alfred Adler believed social tensions are crucial for personality, not sexual tensions, and he developed this idea called the inferiority complex. So that's Alfred Adler. Then Carl Jung, that's pronounced Jung, he is a disciple. Basically, he means he was a student, but then he turned dissenter, meaning he went against Freud. He believed that the unconscious contains more than our repressed thoughts and feelings, but that we have something called a collective conscience. Basically, that a common reservoir of images or archetypes derived from our species' universal experience. Essentially, what he said is that's why there's so many similar creation myths and stuff like that across all these places in the world, is because we have this collective conscious. Though, again, modern-day psychologists say, not really, but he was sort of moving in the right direction. It's more biological than it is cognitive. So there's two types of tests that they would use with these personalities tests. There's the projective test. And so that's the thematic apperception test. You would look at a picture and then say things about it, and your perception of that picture was supposed to tell people about what your thoughts and opinions were. It's an ambiguous picture that you could perceive to be positive or negative, and if you perceive it one way or the other, they will say, yes, clearly you saw this interaction as negative, so you are an introvert or you're afraid of people or something like that. Then the other kind is the Rorschach